In the 1st century, a small, persecuted sect emerged in Judea. Over the next few generations, that local movement expanded to cover the Roman Empire, eventually becoming a dominant global religion. The primary catalysts responsible for this massive cultural shift were 12 men, the original apostles. Curious, but despite their status as some of the most famous figures in history, tracking their actual lives, and particularly their deaths, requires navigating a massive historical vacuum. Historians categorize the surviving data into 3 specific categories: the canonical text, the surrounding cultural traditions, and the physical archaeology found in the dirt. Understanding what actually happened to these men requires us to strictly separate theological framing and cultural legends from physical fact. Our primary historical roadmap for the early church is the Acts of the Apostles, the 2nd volume of a 2-part work that continues the Gospel of Luke. This chart follows theological historiography. Rather than pure biography, the text justifies a demographic transition from a Judean sect to a broad Gentile audience. As this expands onto a map, we trace the movement pushing from Jerusalem toward Rome under figures like Peter and Paul. But the text has a glaring omission. Acts ends abruptly with Paul sitting under house arrest. The ultimate fates of the original apostles are entirely undocumented in the canonical Bible. Because the text was engineered to prove a theological point rather than provide a detailed biography, we have to look to outside sources to discover how the founders actually died. This brings us to the 2nd pillar, church tradition. These are the apocryphal texts, the writings of historians like Eusebius, and medieval collections like the Golden Legend. These sources detail the grim reality of ancient evangelism. For example, tradition holds that Thomas traveled to India to preach, where he was eventually speared to death by local soldiers. The legends surrounding Bartholomew are even more gruesome, claiming he preached in Armenia before being flayed alive and beheaded. The most famous martyrdom legend belongs to Peter. According to tradition, he requested to be crucified upside down in Rome out of humility. The vast scale of St. Peter's Basilica, seen here, is the physical manifestation of that specific tradition taking institutional root. These texts, written anywhere from the 4th to the 13th centuries, are not empirically perfect or canonical, but they serve a vital function as enduring cultural memory. The sheer volume of these grisly legends points to an underlying historical truth. The early Christian expansion was met with violent, systemic persecution. To ground those ancient texts and medieval legends in empirical fact, we have to move into the 3rd pillar, modern archaeology. We have to dig into the physical earth. Between 2019 and 2022, archaeological teams systematically excavated a site on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. As you can see in these deep trenches and complex stone ruins, they were unearthing centuries of history. They discovered a Byzantine-era basilica. Experts believe this structure is the long-lost Church of the Apostles, built over the biblical town of Bethsaida, the hometown of Peter and Andrew. The critical piece of evidence was found right on the basilica's floor, a round mosaic medallion containing a specific Greek petition. The inscription reads, "Constantine, the servant of Christ," and asks for intercession by Peter, explicitly calling him the chief and commander of the heavenly apostles. This physical evidence proves that early Christians actively memorialized these specific men in the exact locations tied to their origins. It anchors the myth directly to the geography. Ultimately, our historical understanding of the apostles is a composite sketch. No single source provides the complete picture, but as this model shows, the evidence locks together into a unified structure. The text maps the movement's geographic and theological trajectory. The tradition preserves the enduring cultural memory of human sacrifice, and the dirt provides the physical footprints that empirically validate the movement's origins. The layering of these geographic routes, violent legends, and physical inscriptions creates an empirical trail. It reveals how the early church anchored its identity in these specific figures, ensuring that even in the absence of a complete biography, their presence remains traceable in both literature and stone. For over 2 centuries, the dominant historical model for the Christianization of the Roman Empire came from Edward Gibbon. Gibbon argued that Emperor Constantine imposed the religion through a top-down political maneuver, using his personal authority to force a change in the state's identity. Demographic data suggests a different reality. This graph plots the estimated Christian population of the empire. For the first 2 centuries, growth is nearly invisible, but it eventually hits a sharp inflection point that transforms into an exponential S-curve. By the year 312, the start of Constantine's reign, the exponential spike was already well underway. The movement had reached a self-sustaining critical mass decades before the emperor officially recognized it. While early observers described this spread as a contagion, ideologically complex shifts do not occur through passive infection. They require active individual adoption. Analyzing this growth requires the tools of modern network science. By applying Everett Rogers' framework for the diffusion of innovations to the social topology of Rome, we can see the mechanics behind the demographic data. The rapid conversion of the empire represents the self-organized spread of a highly optimized social technology. This innovation began on the fringes of the empire. In the 1st century, the initial nodes of the network formed within the suburban environment of Jerusalem. The movement utilized the existing physical topology of the Roman world. Imperial roads and maritime trade routes served as the hardwired communication channels, the edges, that allowed ideas to travel between cities. This map illustrates gravity-guided diffusion. Information flows along probable paths toward hubs like Antioch, Alexandria, and Rome. These cities acted as gravity wells, absorbing the ideology. The network then became modular, functioning as secondary points of origin, severing reliance on the Jerusalem route. High local clustering connected through these regional hubs created a small world network. This decentralized topology made the movement mathematically robust. Localized Roman persecutions might thin the leadership in one city, but growth capacity remained intact because information was distributed across thousands of independent edges. This curve maps how population segments adopt an innovation. The first 2.5% are innovators, social outsiders like the Jewish diaspora and apostles who launch a concept. Next are early adopters, the 13.5%. These respected locals hold the power to legitimize a new practice. Records from the 1st and 2nd centuries identify high-status Roman women acting in this capacity. By joining the network, they leveraged their social standing to provide the movement with its first layer of local institutional respectability. These women integrated the network into influential households. When adoption reaches 16%, a network hits its tipping point. Diffusion becomes mathematically unstoppable. This leads to the early majority. In the 3rd century, a large influx of upper classes joined, pushing adoption toward the peak. Between the years 150 and 250 AD, the Christian population expanded from fewer than 50,000 adherents to over 1 million. This growth trajectory carried the network past the 10% adoption mark, securing its dominance decades before Constantine was born. Rogers identified 5 characteristics that determine whether an individual node adopts an innovation. By measuring the early church against these 5 metrics, we can see its competitive advantage over rival cults. Systems like Mithraism failed to optimize across these vectors, stalling as the Christian network scaled. The first metric is relative advantage. Unlike Roman programs distributing aid based on perceived worth, the Christian network practiced unconditional altruism, offering material support to the poor and orphaned. During the Antonine and Cyprian plagues, the network organized basic nursing care, primarily ensuring that the incapacitated had consistent access to food and water. This elementary social intervention reduced mortality by as much as 2/3 compared to communities where the social fabric had collapsed into anarchy. Ideologically, the movement offered a dualistic anthropology. It asserted that all humans were equally slaves to sin, a framework that granted profound personal dignity and ethical agency to the empire's slave population. This egalitarian structure created a sharp contrast with the rigid, status-obsessed pyramid of traditional Roman hierarchy. By providing systemic healthcare and social services where the state provided none, the religion functioned as a highly efficient miniature welfare state. For compatibility, it piggybacked on the Jewish diaspora, spreading through communities resonating with its monotheistic concepts. Complexity was minimized, baptism was free, and the philosophy egalitarian, accessible to everyone. Trialability provides the necessary processing period before a user fully commits. The Church formalized this through the catechumen system, a structured trial period allowing potential converts to observe and learn the faith before seeking full membership. The final metric, observability, is the degree to which outsiders can see the results of the adoption. High-visibility actions, such as radical charity and the public endurance of martyrdom, served as undeniable validating signals to the non-adopting public. By optimizing across these 5 sociological vectors, the early church developed a system for mass adoption that polytheistic traditions were structurally unable to match. This recontextualizes the role of Constantine. If the network had already achieved critical mass, we must ask what his conversion actually accomplished. In network science terms, Constantine was the ultimate opinion leader. Opinion leaders sit at the center of social networks. They do not typically introduce innovations, rather they confirm and legitimize them for the skeptics who wait for a signal from the top. His conversion triggered a massive signal cascade through elite aristocratic patronage ties. This rapidly onboarded the late majority, who adopted the religion once it became a beneficial component of Roman social and political life. The movement then adapted to its new scale, blurring the boundaries between Christian and pagan traditions as it integrated with the existing imperial infrastructure. Societal change is an emergent property. The Christianization of Rome stands as the result of an optimized social technology reaching its mathematical tipping point.